Kethver sat in the white room, his forearms shaking. The chair was too small for his large body, but he did not complain. He never complained anymore, not since the war ended, not since he learned what humans could do when they decided to fight Dot Doctor. Velinara watched him from across the small table. She was from the Harmony Worlds, where her people had never known war. Her soft blue skin glowed with gentle light, and her voice was always calm. She had been trying to help him for 3 years now, but some nightmares never went away. "Tell me about the beginning again," she said softly. "Sometimes talking about it helps." Kethver's black eyes looked at the wall behind her. On that wall was a picture of a garden where children from many different worlds played together. Human children ran next to alien children. They laughed and played games. It should have made him feel better, but it only reminded him of how different things were now. "They told us humans were nothing," he began, his voice like broken glass. "Just another young species that had barely learned to travel between stars. The High Command called them primitive, backward, easy to control." He remembered that day so clearly. The great meeting hall on the Dominion homeworld filled with hundreds of military officers, all of them confident, all of them sure this would be simple. The humans had refused to join the Dominion peacefully. They had said no when offered the chance to become subjects of the Empire. Such foolishness always ended the same way. "I was tactical officer on the Eternal Conquest," Kethver continued. "Admiral Zeekther's flagship. He was so sure of victory that he only took a small fleet. 3 dreadnoughts, 12 cruisers, 40 escort ships. Against what our spies told us was a collection of barely working human vessels." Dr. Velinara made a note on her pad. "What did the intelligence reports say about human capabilities?" Kethver's mandibles clicked together, a sign he was nervous. "Basic kinetic weapons, simple fusion engines, crude armor plating. Their ships looked like metal boxes compared to our beautiful vessels. Their military tactics seemed straightforward. Linear formations, predictable attack patterns, no innovation." He paused, staring at his hands. 2 of them were artificial now, replacements for the ones he lost in the final battle. The human doctors who made them had done excellent work. They moved just like real hands. Even the pain sensors worked perfectly. "The briefing lasted 2 hours," he said. "Admiral Zeekther showed us pictures of human ships. They were ugly things. All straight lines and sharp angles. No elegance, no beauty. Just metal and weapons bolted together. We laughed at them." The laughter had been loud in that briefing room. Hundreds of Zephyrian officers, veterans of countless campaigns against. Dozens of species, all laughing at images of human spacecraft. How could such crude vessels pose any threat to the mighty Dominion fleet? The Admiral made jokes, Kethver remembered. He said we would be home before the next moon cycle. He said the humans would surrender as soon as they saw our ships. Most species did. One look at a Dominion dreadnought, and even proud species decided that joining the Empire was better than dying. But humans were different. Even then, in those first intelligence reports, there were signs that should have warned them. Small things that nobody paid attention to. Things that seemed unimportant until it was too late. Their whole world was classified as a death world, Kethver said quietly. Class 12 hostile environment. Everything on that planet tried to kill everything else. The weather was violent. The animals were predators. Even the plants were dangerous. Most species would have died on such a world, but humans thrived there. Dr. Velinara looked up from her notes. Did this concern the Admiral? No, Kethver shook his head. He said it proved they were savage, uncivilized. He said civilized species learn to live in peace, not constant warfare. He did not understand that a species that survived on such a world would be different from all the others we had conquered. The preparation had taken weeks. The Dominion did not rush into battle, even against supposedly weak enemies. They gathered intelligence, planned their approach, prepared their tactics. Everything was done properly, according to the manual that had served them well for 1,000 years. We studied their history, Kethver continued. What we found should have terrified us, but we did not understand what we were seeing. Humans had spent their entire existence fighting each other. Not just small conflicts, but massive wars involving millions of soldiers. They had weapons that could destroy entire cities. They had fought for thousands of years and somehow managed not to extinct themselves. The historical records were full of human conflicts. Wars between nations, civil wars within nations, religious wars, wars over resources, wars over ideas. Generation after generation of humans had grown up knowing that somewhere on their world, other humans were fighting and dying. The strangest thing, Kethver said, was that they kept getting better at it. Each war taught them new ways to kill, new strategies, new weapons, new tactics. They learned from every defeat, every victory, every mistake. Other species fought wars to win territory or resources. Humans fought wars to learn how to fight better wars. Dr. Velinara shifted in her chair. This still did not worry your commanders? They thought it made humans weaker, Kethver replied. Admiral Ziegther said that a species constantly at war with itself could never unite against an external enemy. He said human divisions would make them easy to defeat. He was wrong about everything. The final briefing before departure had been almost casual. Admiral Ziegther had stood before his officers, confident and relaxed. The plan was simple. Jump into the human system, demand surrender, destroy any ships that resisted, occupy the colony world. Standard procedure that had worked against 47 other species. I remember his exact words, Kethver said, his voice becoming even quieter. He said, "We are not going to war, officers. We are going to collect a new province for the Empire. These humans will learn what every other species has learned. Resistance to the Dominion is futile." The officers had cheered. Kethver had cheered too, caught up in the confidence of his superiors. They were the Dominion, the greatest military force in the galaxy. They had never lost a war. They had never even lost a major battle. Victory was so certain that some officers were already making plans for their shore leave after the campaign ended. The Admiral assigned me to monitor human communications during the battle, Kethvar continued. He wanted to hear them panic. When they saw our fleet, he wanted to record their surrender for the victory archives. He thought it would be entertaining. Kethvar stopped talking and stared at his artificial hands again. Dr. Velinara waited patiently. She had learned not to push him when the memories became too difficult. "We should have known," he finally whispered. "We should have realized that. Any species that could survive on a world like Earth, that could fight each other for thousands of years without destroying themselves completely, would be unlike anything we had ever faced before." He looked up at Dr. Velinara, and she saw something in his eyes that made her feel cold despite the warm room. It was fear, but not the simple fear of someone who had lost a battle. It was the deep, bone-deep terror of someone who had seen something. That changed how they understood the universe. They were not just another species, Kethvar said. They were predators who had learned to hunt predators. And we walked right into their territory, thinking we were the hunters. The session ended there, as it always did when Kethvar reached this point in his story. Dr. Velinara watched him leave, walking slowly on legs that still pained him from injuries that human doctors had healed as best they could. Tomorrow, he would return, and slowly, carefully, he would tell her more about the day the Dominion learned what human warfare really meant. Kethver returned to the White Room the next day. His artificial hands were steadier today, but Dr. Valinara could see the tension in his shoulders. Yesterday he had talked about the preparation. Today would be harder. Today he would talk about the first battle. The jump to the Kepler system went perfectly. He began without waiting for her to ask. 55 ships of the Dominion fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. The Eternal Conquest led the way, with Admiral Zeke Thur standing on the bridge like he was already accepting the human surrender. Kethver closed his eyes, but the memories were still there. They were always there. I was at my station, monitoring all frequencies, ready to record the human panic when they saw our fleet, ready to hear them beg for mercy. The human colony, world of Kepler 442b, had been green and blue, just like Earth. It hung in space like a jewel, surrounded by orbital stations and mining platforms. A young world, barely 50 years old, but already home to 2 million human colonists. The first thing we noticed was wrong was the silence, Kethver said. No panicked radio chatter. No emergency broadcasts. No desperate calls for help to Earth. The humans said nothing at all for almost 10 minutes after we arrived. Dr. Valinara made a note. What did your admiral think of this? He thought they were too scared to speak, Kethver replied. He was smiling. He told me to open a channel to the colony. He wanted to make his surrender demand personally. But before Admiral Zeke could speak, the human fleet appeared. They had been hiding behind the colony world's moon, using its mass to block Dominion sensors. 8 ships emerged from the moon's shadow, moving in a formation that looked almost like a dance. 8 ships, Kethver whispered. Against our 55, the Admiral laughed when he saw them. He said it would be over in minutes. The human ships were strange to look at. Where Dominion vessels were smooth and curved, built for beauty as much as function, the human ships were all angles and armor. They looked like weapons that someone had decided to put engines on. The largest human ship sent us a message, Kethvar continued. The captain appeared on our screen. A human male with gray hair and cold eyes. He said his name was Jake Morrison, captain of the UES Liberty. Kethver remembered that face perfectly. Captain Morrison had looked tired, like he had not slept well in days, but his eyes were alert and focused. They were the eyes of someone who had made a difficult decision and was at peace with it. Admiral Zeke gave the standard surrender demand, Kethver said. Submit to the Dominion, become subjects of the Empire, and no harm would come to the colonists. It was the same speech he had given to 47 other species. But Captain Morrison's response was unlike anything any other species had ever sighed. He did not beg. He did not try to negotiate. He did not ask for time to consider. You want our colony? Morrison had said, his voice calm and steady. Come and take it. Then he cut the transmission. The Admiral was surprised, Kethvar remembered, but not worried. He ordered the fleet to attack formation. Standard opening move, plasma bombardment to disable their engines, then boarding parties to capture their ships. Simple and clean. The Dominion fleet spread out in their traditional attack pattern, 3 dreadnoughts in the center, with cruisers and escorts forming a wide arc. It was a formation that had never failed, designed to overwhelm any enemy with superior firepower, from multiple angles. That was when we learned the first lesson about human warfare, Kethver said, his voice becoming quieter. They do not fight like other species. Other species try to preserve their ships, minimize their losses, retreat when things go badly. Humans fight like every ship is already dead, and the only question is how much damage it can do before it dies. The human ships scattered when the Dominion fleet attacked, but not in panic. They moved like they had practiced this exact situation 1,000 times. Each ship went to a different vector, but somehow they all ended up in positions where they could support each other. The plasma bombardment that should have crippled them barely scratched their armor, Kethver continued. Human ships were built different. Thicker armor, redundant systems, designed to take damage and keep fighting. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what happened when the humans fired back. They had railguns, Kethver said, and Dr. Velinara saw his hands start to shake again. Not the simple kinetic weapons we expected, but railguns designed by a species that had spent centuries perfecting ways to kill each other. The projectiles moved so fast our shields could not stop them. They punched through our armor like it was paper. The first Dominion ship to die was the cruiser Swift Strike. A railgun round from the human ship UES Boston hit it directly in the engine section. The explosion could be seen from the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, 30,000 kilometers away. But the railguns were not the nightmare, Kethver continued. The nightmare was how they used them. Every shot was calculated. They did not just try to destroy our ships. They targeted specific systems to cause maximum damage and fear. The humans aimed for engine sections to leave ships helpless. They targeted weapon systems to remove threats. They hit life support systems to force evacuations. Each attack was designed not just to kill, but to create chaos and terror among the surviving crew. Then their missiles started hitting us, Kethver said. We expected simple guided weapons, easy to shoot down or confuse. Instead, their missiles changed course unpredictably. They seemed to think for themselves, finding ways around our defenses that no computer should have been able to calculate. Dr. Velinara looked confused. How was this possible? Each missile had a human pilot inside, Kethvar explained. Volunteers who climbed into one-man ships disguised as missiles, flying them manually toward our fleet. They could not be fooled by electronic countermeasures, because they were using human judgment, human instincts. They flew like predators hunting prey. 3 more Dominion ships died to human missile pilots before Admiral Ziether realized what was happening. The humans were not just fighting to win. They were fighting to send a message. Every death was designed to terrify the survivors. The human ship Hughes Dallas was damaged badly, Kethver remembered. Its engines were failing, life support was down, most of its weapons were destroyed. Any reasonable captain would have surrendered or retreated. But the captain of the Dallas was a human woman named Lisa Park. Instead of surrendering, she used her dying ship as a weapon. She aimed the Dallas at our cruiser Bright Victory and fired her engines at maximum power, Kethver said. But she waited until the last second to fire, when our captain thought she was trying to ram him. When he moved to avoid the collision, she changed course and hit him exactly where she wanted to hit him. The Dallas struck the Bright Victory in the weapons storage section. Both ships exploded in a fireball that lit up the entire battle area. But Captain Park had timed it perfectly. The explosion created a debris field that forced other Dominion ships to change course, breaking their formation. That was when I understood, Kethver said, staring at his hands again. Humans do not just accept death in battle. They use death as a weapon. Every human who dies tries to make their death count for something strategic. The battle continued for 14 hours. Ship after ship fell to human weapons, human tactics, human determination. The humans lost 6 of their 8 ships, but they took 47 Dominion vessels with them. At the end, Kethver whispered, only 2 human ships remained operational. Captain Morrison's Liberty and a destroyer called the Houston. Admiral Ziether still had 8 ships left. He could have continued the fight, but Admiral Ziether did not continue the fight. He ordered a retreat to hyperspace, leaving the human colony intact. Why? Dr. Velinara asked. Kethver looked up at her, and she saw that terrible fear in his eyes again. Because we realized that if 2 human ships could destroy 47 of ours, what would happen when they sent 100 human ships? What would happen when they sent 1,000? The session ended with Kethvar staring at the wall, lost in memories of that terrible day when the Dominion first learned that humans were not like other species. They did not fight wars to win territory or resources. They fought wars to completely destroy their enemies' will to fight, and they were very, very good at it. 3 days passed before Kethvar returned to the White Room. Dr. Velanara could see he had not been sleeping well. His eyes were red and tired, and his artificial hands made small clicking sounds when he moved them. She had learned this happened when his memories became too painful. The High Command did not believe our reports. Kethvar began without greeting her. Admiral Ziegther sent detailed recordings of the battle, but they said the data must be wrong. They said no primitive species could destroy a Dominion fleet. After the defeat at Kepler 442, the surviving Dominion ships had limped back to the nearest base. Of the 55 vessels that had attacked the human colony, only 8 returned. The rest were destroyed, or so badly damaged they had to be abandoned in space. They called us cowards, Kethvar said, his voice bitter. The High Command said we had panicked and run from an inferior enemy. They said Admiral Ziegther would face a military court for his failure, but the recordings did not lie. The sensor data showed exactly what had happened. Human ships moving with impossible coordination. Human weapons penetrating Dominion shields like they were not there. Human pilots turning themselves into guided missiles. Human captains using their dying ships as weapons. The intelligence analysts studied the recordings for weeks, Kethvar continued. They found things that made no sense. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Human weapons that our databases said were impossible. Human tactics that violated every rule of space warfare. Dr. Velanara made a note. What did they conclude? That humans were more dangerous than any species the Dominion had ever faced, Kethvar replied. But they also concluded that humans could be defeated. They just needed a bigger fleet and better planning. The High Command's solution was typical Dominion thinking. If 55 ships were not enough, they would send 500. If standard tactics did not work, they would use overwhelming force. They had defeated every other species this way. Surely humans would be no different. But while the High Command planned their revenge, the humans were doing something no other species had ever done, Kethvar said. They were learning from their defeat. This was the part of the story that still confused Kethvar, even years. Later, every other species the Dominion had fought followed the same pattern. After losing most of their fleet, they would surrender or at least retreat to lick their wounds. The survivors would spend months or years recovering from the trauma of defeat. Humans did the opposite. Within 6 months of the first battle, our spies reported impossible things, Kethvar said. Human shipyards working around the clock, new ship designs being tested, human military academies teaching lessons learned from fighting us. The intelligence reports made no sense to Dominion military thinking. Humans had lost 6 ships out of 8. By any reasonable measure, they had been defeated. But instead of acting defeated, they acted like they had won a great victory. They treated their losses as education, Kethvar explained. Every mistake they made, every weapon that failed, every tactic that did not work, they studied it all and found ways to do better next time. The new human ships that began appearing 6 months later looked nothing like the vessels that had fought at Kepler 442. Where the first human ships had been crude but functional, these new vessels looked like nightmares made of metal and weapons. The U.S. Yorktown was their new flagship, Kethvar said, and Dr. Velanara could hear the fear in his voice. Our spies said it was classified as a battlecruiser, but it carried more weapons than our largest dreadnought. And it was not alone. The humans built dozens of ships just like it. The human fleet that emerged from their shipyards 6 months after Kepler 442 was not just larger than their first fleet. It was completely different. The ships moved differently, thought differently. They had learned from watching Dominion tactics and built specifically to counter them. Admiral Rachel Green commanded this new fleet, Kethvar continued. The intelligence reports said she had studied every recording of the first battle. She knew how Dominion ships moved, how our weapons worked, how our commanders thought. But the new human ships were only part of the nightmare. The worst part was how the humans used them. They did not wait for us to attack them again, Kethvar said. They attacked us first. This violated every rule of galactic warfare. The defender always waited for the attacker. It was considered honorable to let the enemy make the first move. Humans did not care about honor. They cared about winning. Commander Bill Rodriguez led the first raids. Kethvar remembered. He had 12 small ships that seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts. They would strike at supply convoys, communication stations, isolated bases, always hitting and running before reinforcements could arrive. The Dominion military was not prepared for this kind of warfare. They were used to big battles between large fleets. They did not know how to fight an enemy that struck at their support systems instead of their warships. Each raid taught the humans more about how we operated, Kethvar explained. They learned our patrol schedules, our communication codes, our supply routes. They used this information to plan bigger and more damaging attacks. Within 3 months, human raiders had crippled Dominion logistics in an entire sector. Bases went without supplies. Ships could not refuel. Communication between fleets became unreliable. The mighty Dominion war machine began to break down. The High Command finally sent the Revenge Fleet, Kethvar said. 200 ships under Admiral Vectanos, the largest fleet the Dominion had assembled in 50 years. Surely this would be enough to crush the human threat. But Admiral Green was ready for them. The human fleet that met the Dominion force at Proxima Centauri was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. 50 human ships moving like parts of a single organism, each vessel perfectly coordinated with all the others. The battle was not one fight, Kethvar said, his voice becoming quieter. It was dozens of fights happening at the same time, all across the system. The humans had spent months preparing the battlefield. Human ships would appear from behind asteroids, fire their weapons, and disappear before the Dominion fleet could respond. Automated defense platforms hidden throughout the system activated when Dominion ships came too close. Supply caches allowed human vessels to rearm and refuel without returning to base. Captain Steve Martinez commanded a squadron of human frigates that seemed to be running away in panic, Kethvar remembered. Admiral Vectanos sent 30 ships to chase them. It was a trap. The frigates led our ships into a carefully prepared kill zone, where human weapons could hit them from 6 directions at once. But the worst part of the battle was not the tactics or the weapons. It was the realization that humans had learned to fight like humans fight, not like other species. They did not just coordinate their ships, Kethvar explained. They coordinated everything. Ground-based weapons on the planets and moons, fighter squadrons hiding in asteroid fields, electronic warfare specialists jamming our communications. Every human in the system was part of the same battle plan. Dr. Valinara frowned. How was such coordination possible? Because humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years, Kethvar replied. They understood warfare in ways no other species did. They knew that battles are not won by individual ships or brave captains. They are won by entire civilizations, working together toward a single goal. The battle at Proxima Centauri lasted 18 hours. When it ended, 170 Dominion ships had been destroyed or captured. The human fleet lost 12 vessels. Admiral Vectanos tried to surrender, Kethvar said. But Admiral Green refused to accept his surrender. She said surrender was a privilege that had to be earned. She said the Dominion had not yet learned the price of making war on humanity. Instead of accepting surrender, the human fleet pursued the fleeing Dominion ships back to their base. They destroyed the shipyards, captured the supply depots, and sent the survivors home with a message for the High Command. The message was simple, Kethver whispered. Stop attacking human colonies, or the next human fleet would attack Dominion. Worlds, and the next human fleet would be bigger. This was when Kethvar realized the true nightmare of human warfare. It was not their weapons or their tactics or their willingness to die. It was their ability to learn and adapt and improve faster than any other species. Every battle made them stronger. Every defeat taught them lessons that made victory more. Likely next time. Other species fought wars to win battles, Kethver said, staring at his artificial hands. Humans fought wars to win the peace that came after the war. They were not just trying to defeat us. They were trying to make sure we could never threaten them again. The session ended with Kethver lost in memories of watching human ships disappear into hyperspace, carrying with them the future of galactic civilization. The Dominion had thought they were fighting a war of conquest. The humans had been fighting a war of liberation, and they were winning. Kethver did not come to therapy for a week after telling Dr. Velinara about Proxima Centauri. When he finally returned, she could see he had been having the nightmares again. His artificial hands trembled constantly now, and he kept looking over his shoulder as if something was following him. After Proxima Centauri, everything changed, he began without sitting down. He paced around the small room like a caged animal. The High Command finally understood they were not fighting a normal war. They were fighting for the survival of the Dominion itself. The defeat of Admiral Vectanos had sent shockwaves through the entire Zephyrian Empire. 200 ships destroyed by 50 human vessels. The impossible had become reality, and the military leaders who had laughed at human capabilities now faced their worst nightmare. They called it the Great Mobilization, Kethvar continued, finally sitting down but still unable to keep still. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier in the Dominion was recalled for one final assault on humanity. 2,000 vessels, including the planet-killer weapons we had never used before. Dr. Velinara had heard rumors of these weapons, but had never seen the classified reports. What were planet killers? Weapons that could crack a world in half, Kethver replied, or burn away its atmosphere, or poison its oceans. We built them to terrify other species into surrender without having to use them. The threat was usually enough. But humans had proven that threats meant nothing to them. They had already shown they would rather die fighting than live as subjects. The High Command decided that if humans would not surrender, they would be exterminated completely. I was transferred to the dreadnought Inevitable Victory, Kethvar said, the flagship of Grand Admiral Zorthek himself. He commanded the entire fleet personally. He wanted to be there when humanity was finally crushed. The preparation for this final assault took months. Every Dominion world contributed ships and crews. Veterans were called back from retirement. New weapons were rushed into production. The greatest military force in galactic history assembled for one purpose: to end the human threat forever. But while we prepared for war, the humans were doing something we never expected. Kethver said, his voice growing quieter. They were making friends. This was perhaps the most shocking intelligence report the Dominion had ever received. Human diplomats had been traveling throughout the galaxy, visiting species that had grievances against the Dominion, not to conquer them or threaten them, but to offer them something the galaxy had never seen before. They called it alliance, Kethvar explained. Not conquest or submission, but voluntary cooperation between equals. It was a concept so alien to Dominion thinking that our analysts could not understand what the humans were trying to achieve. The human diplomat Margaret Davis had visited 47 different species in 6 months. Her message was always the same. Humanity had proven the Dominion could be defeated, and together, all the oppressed species could be free. The Resonants were the first to join, HFY remembered. Crystal beings who had been enslaved for their ability to create energy shields. They had tried to rebel 3 times and failed each time. But the humans convinced them that this time would be different. The depth swimmers joined next, bringing their advanced stealth technology. Then the plant-like verdants, who had been forced to provide food for Dominion worlds. One by one, species that had been conquered and oppressed for centuries began to believe that freedom was possible. The worst betrayal came from our own people, Cuthbert said, and Dr. Valinara could hear the pain in his voice. 17 Zephyrian colonies declared independence and joined the Human Alliance. They said they were tired of serving an empire that only brought suffering to the galaxy. The Terran alliance that emerged was unlike anything in galactic history. Dozens of species working together, each contributing their unique strengths to a common cause. The Resonants provided shield technology that could protect entire fleets. The depth swimmers built ships that could attack from impossible angles. The Verdans supplied food and medical supplies that kept the Alliance fed and healthy. General Peter Williams commanded the combined fleet that met us at Wolf 359, HFY continued. A human who had learned to use the strengths of every species in his alliance. He had resonant shield specialists, depth swimmer stealth experts, Verdan supply coordinators, and dozens of others working together like parts of a machine. The battle that followed redefined warfare for every species in the galaxy. It was not just humans fighting with human tactics. It was dozens of species fighting together with tactics that combined the best ideas from all their different military traditions. The resonant ships created shield matrices that protected our enemies better than our own shields protected us, HFY said. Depth swimmer vessels would appear from nowhere, strike at our flanks, and disappear before we could respond. Verdan medical ships kept damaged Alliance vessels, fighting long after they should have been destroyed. But the human contribution to the Alliance was not just their weapons or their tactics. It was their ability to inspire others to fight harder than they had ever fought before. I monitored Alliance communications during the battle, HFY explained. What I heard terrified me more than their weapons. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working together perfectly. They trusted each other completely. They were willing to die for each other. The defector Zephyrian ships were the most disturbing element of the Alliance fleet. They knew Dominion tactics perfectly, could predict Dominion movements, could exploit every weakness in Dominion technology. They had become traitors to their own species, but they fought with a determination that made them more dangerous than any human ship. Captain Veldorian commanded the defector squadron, HFY said. He had been my friend at the military academy. We had served together for 20 years. When I saw his ship on the Alliance side, I tried to contact him, to ask him why. The conversation between the 2 old friends had been brief but devastating. Veldorian had looked tired but determined. He had told HFY that he was fighting for the future his children deserved, not the past that had brought only suffering. He said the Dominion was a disease that needed to be cured, HFY remembered. He said humans had showed him what the galaxy could become if species worked together instead of one dominating all the others. The battle lasted 3 days and involved over 3,000 ships from dozens of species. It was the largest military engagement in galactic history, and it ended with the complete destruction of the Dominion's ability to wage war. Third day, when our losses became impossible to ignore, Grand Admiral Zorthek made a decision that still haunts my dreams, HFY said. He ordered the planet killer weapons to be used against the Alliance fleet. The weapons that could destroy worlds were fired at the center of the Alliance formation. For a moment, it looked like the Dominion might still win through sheer destructive power. But Admiral Susan Clark was ready for this, HFY continued. She had studied our weapons, understood how they worked. When she saw the planet killers firing, she made a choice that only a human could make. Admiral Clark ordered a third of her fleet to ram the planet killer weapons, knowing that the explosions would destroy both the weapons and the ships attacking them. It was a sacrifice so massive and so deliberate that it broke the will of every Dominion commander watching. 800 Alliance ships died to stop those weapons, Kethva whispered. But they saved the rest of the fleet and showed every Dominion crew that humans and their allies would rather die than allow us to win. The remaining Alliance fleet then did something that no military force in galactic history had ever attempted. They attacked through the explosion clouds, using the chaos and radiation as cover, and struck at the heart of the Dominion formation, with such ferocity that resistance collapsed completely. After that, Dominion ships began surrendering rather than fighting, Kethver said, not because they were cowards, but because they had seen what humans and their allies were capable of. They knew that continuing to fight would only mean more death for no purpose. The war ended not with humanity's defeat, but with the complete collapse of the Dominion as a political entity. Species after species declared independence, following the human example of voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission. In 2 years, an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years simply stopped existing, Kethvar concluded. Not because humans conquered it, but because humans showed everyone a better way to live. The session ended with Kethvar staring out the window at the garden where children from many worlds played together. Dr. Velinara knew that tomorrow would be the hardest session yet. Tomorrow, he would talk about what came after the war, and how the survivors learned to live in the new galaxy that humans had created. Dr. Velinara waited 3 weeks before Kethver returned for his final session. When he entered the White Room, she noticed something different about him. His artificial hands were still, and he walked without the nervous energy that had plagued him for years. He looked tired, but it was the tiredness of someone who had finally put down a heavy burden. The hardest part is not that we lost, he began, sitting down slowly in his chair. The hardest part is that they were right. After the battle at Wolf 359, the surviving Dominion forces had scattered to their home worlds. There was no central command anymore, no grand plan for resistance or revenge. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years simply ceased to exist, dissolving like salt in water. I spent 6 months in a hospital ship, Kethvar continued, recovering from injuries, watching the news reports, trying to understand what had happened to the galaxy I knew. The reports were unlike anything any former Dominion citizen had expected. Instead of mass executions or enslavement of the defeated, the humans and their allies were offering something unprecedented: reconciliation and integration. They called it the Galactic Recovery Program, Kethver explained. Every former Dominion world could choose its own government, its own future. No conquest, no forced conversion to human ways. Just the opportunity to be free for the first time in centuries. Dr. Velinara made a note. How did the Dominion populations react to this? With suspicion at first, Kethvar replied. We had been taught that victory meant domination, that the strong ruled the weak, that mercy was weakness. We could not believe that humans would defeat us and then offer us freedom instead of chains. But the humans were patient. They had learned from studying Dominion history that change took time, especially when it involved undoing centuries of authoritarian rule. They offered aid without strings attached, protection without occupation, trade without exploitation. Colonel Jason Miller visited our hospital ship, Kethva remembered. He was one of the human commanders who had fought at Wolf 359. I expected him to gloat, to mock us for our defeat. Instead, he sat with wounded Dominion soldiers and talked about his own experiences with war trauma. This had been perhaps the most shocking discovery of all. The humans who had defeated the Dominion so decisively were themselves haunted by what they had done. They understood the psychological cost of violence because they had been paying it for their entire history. Miller told me something I will never forget, Kethver said. He said that humans did not want to be warriors. They became warriors because their world demanded it. But being warriors meant understanding the cost of war, not just to the defeated, but to everyone who fights. The conversation with Miller had lasted hours. The human colonel had spoken about sleepless nights, about the faces of enemies he had killed, about the weight of making decisions that led to others' deaths. He had shown Kethvar that victory in war did not mean freedom from its consequences. He said that every human soldier carried scars, visible and invisible. Kethvar continued. He said that was why humans fought wars to end wars, not to win. Glory or territory. They knew the true price of violence and wanted to pay it as few times as possible. This led to the establishment of the Galactic Veterans Treatment Center, where Kethver now sat. It had been designed by Dr. Patricia Johnson, a human psychologist who had studied combat trauma for decades. Her research had shown that the aggressive instincts that made humans effective warriors could be redirected toward healing and protection. Dr. Johnson visited me personally, Kethver said. She explained that trauma was not a sign of weakness, but a natural response to unnatural events. She said that healing was possible, but it required understanding what the trauma meant and finding new meaning in survival. The treatment protocols used at the center were unlike anything in galactic medical practice. Instead of simply suppressing memories or numbing emotional responses, they helped veterans process their experiences and find ways to use their knowledge for constructive purposes. They offered me a choice, Kethver explained. I could retire to a peaceful world and try to forget what had happened, or I could help build the new galaxy that was emerging from the ashes of the old one. Many former Dominion officers chose retirement, wanting nothing more than to escape their memories. But others, like Kethver, found that they could not simply walk away from their experiences. They had learned too much about warfare and its consequences to ignore their knowledge. I became an advisor to the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, Kethver said, using my understanding of military tactics to help prevent conflicts instead of win them. It was strange work for a former warrior, but it felt right. The Galactic Peacekeeping Force was another human innovation, a military organization designed not to conquer, but to protect. It was staffed by veterans from all species, former enemies working together to maintain the peace that so many had died to achieve. Captain Rebecca Torres commanded my peacekeeping unit, Kethver remembered. A human who had lost her arm at Proxima Centauri, but refused to retire. She taught me that the best way to honor the dead was to make sure their sacrifice led to something better. The work was difficult and often dangerous. Civil wars on former Dominion worlds, disputes between species learning to coexist, criminal organizations trying to exploit the chaos of transition. But it was also rewarding in ways that conquest had never been. We saved lives instead of taking them, Kethver said. We protected the weak instead of exploiting them. We built trust between species that had been enemies for generations. Years passed, and the new galactic order began to take shape. The Terran Alliance evolved into the Galactic Federation, a voluntary association of free worlds working together for mutual benefit. Trade flourished, science advanced, art and culture bloomed as species learned from each other. The strangest thing, Kethva said, was how quickly former Dominion worlds adapted to freedom. Worlds that had been oppressed for centuries suddenly produced incredible innovations when their people were allowed to think and create without fear. The Zephyrian homeworld itself became a center for conflict resolution studies, using the painful lessons of the war to help other species avoid similar mistakes. Former military academies were converted into universities teaching cooperation instead of conquest. Ambassador Davis visited us last month, Kethver said, referring to the human diplomat who had built the alliance that defeated the Dominion. She thanked us for our work with the peacekeeping force. She said that former enemies working together for peace was the best proof that the war had been worth fighting. Dr. Velinara closed her notebook and looked at Kethver. How do you feel about your experiences now? Kethver was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where human and alien children played together. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. I understand now why humans fight the way they do, he said. They do not fight because they enjoy violence or because they want to dominate others. They fight because they can imagine a better world and are willing to sacrifice everything to make it real. He stood up and walked to the window, watching. A young human child help a Zephyrian child who had fallen down. The simple act of kindness between species that had once been bitter enemies spoke to everything the galaxy had become. The nightmare of human warfare was never their weapons or their tactics, Kethver concluded. It was their refusal to accept that suffering and oppression were inevitable. They fought not just to defeat their enemies, but to prove that a better way of living was possible. As the session ended, Kethver signed his discharge papers from the treatment center. After 5 years of therapy, he was ready to return to his work with the peacekeeping force, carrying with him the hard-won wisdom that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from winning a war, but from building a peace. Worth preserving. Dr. Velinara watched him leave, knowing that she would probably never see him again. But she also knew that his story would continue, not as a tale of trauma and defeat, but as an example of how even the deepest wounds could heal when given purpose and meaning. The galaxy was at peace, and former warriors had become its guardians. The nightmare of human warfare had ended, replaced by the dream of what the galaxy could become when all its children were free.